I'm going to prefix this by saying that I have not completely thought this through. I read an article, I followed that up with reading a paper and some other papers and some mediocre research. And I have a general idea of something, have not fleshed out how it may or may not work. So bear with me. I read an article about a new way of training AI. The typical way of training is reinforcement learning with human feedback. By the way, this is a gross oversimplification, but essentially what happens is AI is given a prompt, it gives a response, and there's human feedback on essentially scoring it, giving feedback, that kind of thing. So it's saying whether it's good or not, an appropriate response, formatted correctly, those kinds of things. This article is a partnership between Apple and Carnegie Mellon. And there was basically some research on, and I have some notes in my notebook to kind of keep me on track. So if you see me looking down here, that's what I'm looking at. So it's reinforcement learning with checklist feedback. The gross oversimplification here is AI is given a prompt. It then is instructed to build a checklist. They specifically call it an atomic checklist. So this basically means that it has to build itself a checklist of yes or no items to accomplish the prompt rather than anything vague. So if you were going to look at this from the point of view of education, it wouldn't be write a well-formed essay. It would be write an essay with an introduction, 3 content paragraphs, and a conclusion. So it could have a checklist. Was there an introduction? Were there 3 content? And basically it can answer yes or no questions down the list, not let's just assume that we all know what a well-formed essay is and blah, blah, blah. That's essentially what happened. So then the next step is there's a teacher AI, and that model, usually a bigger model, bigger as in more parameters, more processing power, that kind of thing. It goes through and it essentially checks the checklist, gives feedback, and then it creates this feedback loop where that goes back to the smaller model. That model redoes its prompt until everything's accomplished. And then that's used as an example of this is a good prompt for this kind, or this is a good response for this kind of prompt. And then you move on to the next thing. In reading that, I was kind of intrigued about how could that be used in education for humans? And my thought process here was, okay, the natural assumption here is take a course and students create their own rubric, and then they're graded on that rubric. But that's a super simple take, and there's a lot of research out on that. If I remember, I'll link an article that I found that I kind of read about that concept. So what I think is kind of interesting here, though, is that atomic checklist rather than a rubric. So what does it look like if you have a course and a project, students are given this project, and their first step is to create an atomic checklist of what they need to do to accomplish the assessment or the project. Then that can be reviewed by the instructor to make sure that it hits whatever your guidelines are. I think in this particular case, you're given guidelines. So the AI was trained on like 130,000 tasks or something like that. So it had pre-training on this. So the assumption here is that a student would have to have pre-training in some way, shape, or form. That may be just like a guideline sheet. So the student creates the tasks, it's reviewed by the instructor, and the instructor provides feedback on the task list. And then the student moves on to do the project based on that list, and they're graded on their own list. Now, I do think for proper assessment, you might have to have some additional things in there. Some of these steps might be too much in certain circumstances. This is not something likely that you're going to do on low stakes assignments. This might be only something that can be done in a capstone course or in an internship course, or I don't know exactly. That's the part where I was hoping to flesh out more ideas by now. I've been kind of stewing on it for a week and a half before recording this video, and I haven't really come up with what that particularly looks like. I could make it work in some of the computer science courses that I used to teach. If I was teaching one right now, I probably would try it out this semester just to see how I could implement it. I've talked to some faculty members about how they could potentially implement it. Nobody's 100% sure how it may or may not work, or if it's worth exploring. I think the key takeaways here are the student getting involved in their own learning in a way that forces them to learn. So we're trying to find ways to avoid AI use or embrace AI use. I think this is an interesting way to do it, because part of the requirement is them making that atomic checklist. And to be able to make an atomic checklist of every little thing that you need to do to accomplish a task, you have to really understand the task and probably have the ability to do it to make said checklist in the first place. At least that's my theory. I also think that with the student choosing the thing that they're going to be graded on, in theory, that there may be more buy-in from the student on the assessment, because I anecdotally observe students struggling with caring about their assessments, which is why I think they fall toward cheating potentially or using AI more than they should, is they're struggling to see the value in some of the assessments we give them. And the truth be told, after talking to many faculty members, they struggle to express the value in a lot of their assessments, if I'm being perfectly blunt about it. And I think there's something here that gives you student buy-in, it gives you faculty buy-in, but it may create more work for the faculty. Now, I hold a personal opinion that if there's more work on us as employees and it still benefits the students, I don't care. Now, there is that question of level of undue burden. So is this an undue burden on the student? Is this an undue burden on the faculty member? I don't know. You'd have to try it out and kind of see where it went to really know that for sure, I think. I'm not sure what it looks like. That's the part I'm trying to figure out. I think it looks different in every subject. It probably looks different with every course, probably looks different with every assessment, but I think that's also a strength in it. While it is different, there's no like generic way to implement this. I do think it's an interesting approach in customizing assessments in a way that students can embrace them, faculty can see some value, students can see some additional value, and potential for implementing some AI-based stuff, because there could be instructions on how to implement AI and helping them build the atomic checklist, especially in like a feedback loop situation. But there's always the question of, would something like this take too much time out of a semester, especially when you have faster semesters that are only 4 weeks or 8 weeks or something like that? Maybe it only works if you're in a capstone where like the project for the course is the grade for the course. I'm not sure. There's more there. I'm not 100% sure what the more is, but I think there's something there if you really focus on student generated, the atomic checklist part, and a feedback loop. And I assume because I did lightweight research, I assume there's research out there that already does this, because the thing I tend to find is a human learning technique was implemented for AI. I read about the AI version of it, and then I start thinking, how could this be used for humans? And I end up sort of regurgitating some of a previous theory. But if there's enough difference in it that may trigger something else, I think there's something valuable about this atomic checklist thing. There's no gray area. It's literally black or white. It's like, yes, this accomplished, or no, this wasn't accomplished. I think there's a lot of value there. There may be something out there. I know there's a lot of research about students doing their own rubrics and that kind of thing, but I've not come across the atomic checklist. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that part I find kind of interesting about this concept. I'm not 100% sure how you implement it, and I think it's because there's not a generic way to implement it. I really do think you have to implement it on a case-by-case basis. But that's one of those notebook thoughts that I had to get out of my head, but I wanted to stew on it to try to get a little further along than the idea. But that was my disclaimer with this whole vlog, or whatever this is I'm going to talk about half-baked ideas, just kind of get them out of my head. That's kind of where I'm at on that. So I don't know, if you have an idea, if this triggers something, if you try something, yeah, I would love to hear the results of what it was and where you went with it. But this was just something I was kind of intrigued by.